Back in 1991, nothing in the Legend of Zelda series was set in stone. Only 2 games in the series had been released, and everything about the games were vastly different. The story, the gameplay, heck, even the second game dropped the Legend of Zelda moniker, simply calling itself Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. At this point in the series, it was a very valid question to ask. What was a Zelda game? Well, that'll change in 1991, when The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was released for the Super Famicom system in Japan and Super Nintendo Entertainment System in North America in 1992, cementing the legacy of The Legend of Zelda. And we have one more question we want to ask today. Does this game still hold up in 2022? My name is Emberus, and this is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. First, let's talk about the game itself. You play as the titular character, Zelda. I mean Link. You play as Link. Thanks to a cutscene at the beginning of the game, you learn that an evil wizard, Aghanim, has taken over Hyrule Castle, killed the king, and captured the Princess Zelda. Aghanim has kidnapped the descendants of the Seven Sages to break the seal over the Golden Land and take the Triforce for himself. Afterward, you receive a telepathic message from Zelda, who asks you to come rescue her. After waking up, your uncle tells you to stay home while he goes to check on the castle. Being the hero you are, you follow him, and find your uncle dying in the sewers of Hyrule Castle. He entrusts you with his sword and shield, and tells you to go save the princess. You do so, and after taking her to the sanctuary, you find out about a magical sword that is powerful enough to defeat Aghanim. Before getting the Master Sword, however, you must venture into 3 dungeons that bear the mystical pendants, imbued with courage, wisdom, and power. Once you defeat these dungeons and gain the Master Sword, you find yourself in a climactic battle against Aghanim. However, before you can destroy the wizard, he pulls you into the Dark World. This is the world that used to be the Golden Land, where the Triforce was held. But Aghanim got there first and tainted it, turning it into the Dark World. You get a message from Sahar Surala, a sage who helped you earlier, and he tells you that to defeat Aghanim, you must save the 7 maidens that are hidden around this cursed land. Once you save these maidens, then you are tasked to enter Ganon's tower and defeat the evil wizard once and for all. Once you have climbed the tower and upon defeating Aghanim, you find out that he is actually the evil demon king, Ganon, who disguised himself as a wizard to enact his plan to obtain the Triforce and rule over both worlds. However, being the hero you are, you engage in a battle with the Demon King and slay him with his silver arrows. Upon beating Ganon, you find the Triforce, who bestows you one wish, and you wish for peace. Yep, that's a Zelda game, alright, full of dungeons and evil pig wizards and princesses. But is that the only thing that makes a Zelda game? Well, obviously not, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about how Zelda 2 is such a departure from the series. I believe there to be 3 things that make a Zelda game: items, dungeons, and the marriage of items and dungeons in gameplay. First, items. A Link to the Past introduced a slew of items that became staples in later Zelda games. The hookshot, the boomerang, fire and ice sources, bottles, and it also reintroduced items like the bow and bombs, making them use actual item resources instead of rupees like in the original. While not all the items are necessarily unique, for example, the magic cape is literally only used to cross the spiky pit to get the Cane of Birna, which is a magic cape that can damage enemies. A lot of them are, and they are all used for a variety of purposes. The hookshot can not only pull you across big gaps, but it can freeze certain enemies and pull items like rupees and keys toward you. Very few items only have one use, unlike something like the raft in the first Zelda game. The next part of what makes a Zelda game are the dungeons. Traditionally, there have been anywhere from 4 to nearly a dozen different dungeons. A Link to the Past clocks in at around 13 dungeons, if you count places like Hyrule Castle and Ganon's Tower. The dungeons are all themed very differently. The second Dark World dungeon, Swamp Palace, is full of water and requires you to raise different water levels so you can swim across them and gain access to other areas within the dungeon. The fourth Dark World dungeon, Thieves' Town, is an underground dungeon where thieves hid their treasures and those that they kidnapped. These dungeons are filled to the brim with different puzzles and enemies, and getting through any dungeon is certainly an ordeal. Thankfully, each dungeon gives you a map, which shows you the rest of the dungeon rooms and your current position, as well as a compass, which outlines the location of the final boss. With each dungeon comes a greater challenge, and each time you conquer that final boss, the feeling of accomplishment grows. Now to what I think may be the most important thing of a Zelda game: the unity of item and dungeon progression. In most dungeons, you obtain an item that does 2 major things for you: allows you to overcome obstacles in that dungeon, and allows you to defeat the final boss. Again, we will be looking at the hookshot as a fantastic example of this. The dungeon in which you obtain the hookshot, Swamp Palace, has multiple large gaps that you can't jump across, and there are no stairs up to those areas. However, once you get the hookshot, you can pull yourself across these gaps, opening a ton of movement options not only in this dungeon, but also in the overworld, like crossing this gap over the river to get into Thieves Town. Once you finish the dungeon, you are faced with the boss, Argus, a giant eyeball surrounded by little floating cloud thingies. To defeat Argus, you need to use the hookshot to pull the clouds away from his body and stab them with your sword. Not every dungeon has the requirement of using the dungeon items to traverse the dungeon and beat the final boss, but when it's used, it enhances the gameplay so much more. Now, I've talked about what a Zelda game is. I do feel that items, dungeon exploration, and the unity between the two is what makes a Zelda game so unique, and why we keep coming back almost 17 games into the series. But now we ask a bigger question. Does this specific Zelda game hold up? My answer is going to be yes. Mostly. I think in general, this game holds up extremely well, especially when compared to its older siblings. The menus are a lot friendlier, the game actually has characters that tell you where to go, as opposed to an old man in a cave telling you, "There's a secret in the Eastern Peninsula." And the enemies aren't stupid difficult. It feels a lot fairer to the player in a lot of regards. However, there's still a few things that even I can't really look past. Some of the puzzles are just downright obtuse, like the block puzzle at the beginning of the second half of Desert Palace. There was an example of a block being movable in the basement of Hyrule Castle, but how are you supposed to know that moving a block can open a door? There aren't a lot of these, let's put an obtuse puzzle in the game to pad out the runtime, but when it hits, oh boy are they obtuse. Quite possibly the worst game design of the whole game is the Ice Rod. Hidden on the eastern side of Lake Hylia, you are actually told to go down and visit there to get a good item by Sahar Surala after completing the first dungeon. And the Ice Rod is very nice, as it defeats each of the Lanmolas in Desert Palace in 2 hits. However, it's not required for that dungeon, or the 3rd dungeon, or any of the Dark World dungeons. Until you get to the boss of the 7th dungeon, Turtle Rock. You need the Ice Rod to defeat the Firehead of Trinex. And you might not even remember where to go get the Ice Rod, as it's spent a whole 10 dungeons since Sahar Surala told you about the unnamed item. Again, you are told about this item and where to get it, so I'm not sure how mad people are allowed to be over this fact. But I'll still put it under the more obtuse than it needed to be category. Just put the Ice Rod in Ice Dungeon for Pete's sake. There are a few more examples of egregious game design, like the Quake Medallion, which is required to enter Turtle Rock, being tucked away in an obscure corner of the map. But I'm inclined to believe that this all feeds into the adventure feel that series creator Shigeru Miyamoto wanted with this game. It is well known that as a child, he would wander the hills and countryside of Japan. He especially remembers as a schoolchild climbing up a large mountain and finding a lake on top. It gave him such a sense of wonder and amazement, and he pulled on those feelings for the early Legend of Zelda games. And I have to say, it works beautifully. Is every nook and cranny filled with items that will be worth your time to explore? No, but that's how the real world is. You need to search lots of places to find something that will actually be useful to you. So with all that being said, how do I feel about The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past? I believe that it does perfectly what it set out to do. Give the player an adventure. It's not perfect, and there are definitely flaws in the world design and gameplay, but I'll be darned if this isn't one of the best 2D games I've ever played. I'm not going to be putting a number on it, but suffice it to say that this is one of my favorite Zelda games. I'm planning on ranking every Zelda game on the channel, so this ranking may change, but for now I'm going to place this in the top 5 of Zelda games. Again, I may shuffle this ranking around as I get to playing the rest of the Legend of Zelda games, but I do believe this to be a top 5 Zelda game. It established an awesome formula that hundreds of game developers have tried to emulate, and it still holds up to the test of time despite being nearly 30 years old. And that wraps it up. Thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I started this YouTube channel on a whim, and I'm grateful at least some people enjoy my content. Like I said, I'm planning on playing and reviewing every single Zelda game on this channel, so if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and comment about what Zelda game you want me to cover next. Thanks, and remember to be a first-rate you.